6:14 a.m. Miami International Airport. Cargo Terminal D. A 40-foot container sits on a secondary inspection pad. Stenciled on the side, Meridian Aerospace Reclamation. Below that, a manifest code and a country of origin from Central America. The container has been here since 30. Eat it methodically, photographing the stack before a single housing was pulled, then working piece by piece, laying each one out on the dock surface as the full count was confirmed. On paper, the CBP officer who flagged it has been running secondary scans for 11 years. He knows what aluminum reads like on a density scan. These housings read wrong. Not by much, but wrong enough. He held the container. That single decision, made at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in late October 2025, pulled the thread on a $128 million weapons pipeline that had been running through Miami's cargo infrastructure for nearly 4 years. 12 arrests, 4 simultaneous raid sites, 3 federal agencies coordinating across 2 counties, and a smuggling method so technically precise it had been invisible to standard cargo detection for the entire operational run. The story is not the weapons. The story is the hide. Here is how it worked. Agents at the dispatch center pulled the Meridian Aerospace Reclamation registration, incorporated in Florida, early 2021, Broward County, listed activity in decommissioned aircraft components from Latin American aviation markets. The corporate records showed a commercial formation service as registered agent, a Florida holding company as the single listed principal. The surveillance monitor wall displayed the Miami International cargo import history tied to the Meridian account, 14 months of consistent monthly arrivals, container manifest records stacked in the system. On paper, this is a legitimate niche industry. Aviation teardown is a real business. Retired aircraft generate a genuine secondary market in serviceable parts, core components, and raw material for certified repair stations. Brake housings specifically are a reasonable import item. Heavy, industrial, low value per unit, moved in bulk by container. Customs attention at the cargo level typically focuses on declared value and prohibited materials classification. Aluminum alloy brake housings from a documented teardown operation raise almost no flags. They are exactly the kind of commodity that passes through cargo terminals by the hundreds of containers per week. That was the design. The actual operation worked in layers. At an origin port in Central America, a foundry operated under a surface-level contract as a scrap aluminum processing facility. Legitimate work came through. Enough of it to maintain credible activity on the books, pay utility costs, justify the operation to neighbors and municipal records. The facility had been registered and operating for years before the Meridian import arrangement started. The secondary operation ran alongside the legitimate work. Agents reviewing the evidence laid out the procurement paper trail on the interrogation room table, invoices from multiple vendor accounts, material receipts spread across months, purchase orders small enough to disappear inside the normal consumption log of an aluminum scrap processor. The bullet casing evidence recovered from the foundry floor told a different story than the paperwork. The sourcing had been broken into fragments, each fragment unremarkable on its own. Surveillance footage from inside the foundry showed the night shift at work, a reduced crew, overhead lighting cut to the production floor, machining equipment running through the weekend window when the facility logged its lowest headcount. What agents pulled from the evidence collection scene were near-specification brass and steel blanks, rough to profile, photographed on the evidence table beside a compact semi-automatic frame for comparison. Not finished, not functional, recognizable under federal statute. Federal agents spread the evidence across a processing table, brass blanks, aluminum housings split open, suppressor tubes laid out in a row. Forensic photography captured each component in sequence, the blanks still seated inside the housing cavity where the aluminum pour had locked them in place. The tube sections cut longitudinally to show how they had been oriented through the rotor core. Evidence collection moved methodically down the line, each piece tagged and photographed before the next was touched. Agents worked through the housings one by one, forensic photography documenting what the exterior was designed to communicate. Wear marks scored into the aluminum surface, a surface treatment that read as oxidation from years in service. The finish was examined under field lighting, the kind of industrial scarring that signals hardware pulled from a regional turboprop after a long service life, not a part machined last month in a foundry running night shifts. From outside, each housing looked like standard worn aviation brake assembly. From a standard cargo X-ray, it read as dense industrial aluminum alloy with internal structural variation. The density signature of brass and steel inside aluminum, at the specific ratios used in these castings, falls within a range that cargo X-ray systems can misread as manufacturing artifact or internal wear variation. The method exploited a real limitation in the technology. Almost, the problem with precision methods is that they require consistent execution across every production run, every foundry shift, every pour cycle. And the foundry, over a 14-month operational run, developed small but measurable variations in pore density between housings of the same batch. In most runs, these variations landed within tolerance. The housings cleared secondary. The containers moved to the teardown yard in Doral. The frames came out. The operation continued. But in the shipment that arrived at Terminal D on October 28, 2025, two housings in the same batch read slightly differently from the others. Not dramatically. Not in a way that would trigger automated secondary screening. The CBP officer running the scan almost moved past it. He has said since that he almost did. He did not. He pulled two housings from the container for physical teardown at the Federal Inspection Lab. The remaining 62 housings and the container itself were placed on hold pending lab results. The Meridian point of contact in the logistics chain received a standard delay notification, equipment inspection, routine processing delay, expected release within 72 hours. Agents reviewing the dash camera footage from the courier arrest noted the timestamp gap 72 hours between container clearance and the interdiction team's notification. The surveillance monitor showed the Meridian account moving through the system clean during that window. The delay had not been administrative backlog, it had been a buffer. Operational space built into the timeline. The lab turnaround took 18 hours. What came back confirmed the anomaly and then some. Inside each housing, embedded in the aluminum matrix, 4 brass handgun frames, rough machined to compact semi-automatic profile. Dimensionally consistent with a specific frame pattern that HSI and ATF analysts recognized from prior ghost gun seizures in the southeastern U.S. regional market. Not finished weapons, not functional without significant additional machining, but identifiable under federal statute as firearm frames, and present in a way that was unambiguously deliberate. The container held 64 housings. 2 pulled for lab contained 8 frames between them. If the remaining 62 ran at the same density, the math on that single container, approximately 124 frames, plus whatever suppressor tube content the uninspected housings carried. HSI's Miami Air and Marine Group received notification at 11:22 p.m. on October 29, 2025. The supervisory special agent at the cargo interdiction desk reviewed the lab report and the manifest package. The Meridian corporate registration opened in a second window. The import history tied to the Meridian account at Miami International Cargo stretched back 14 months, monthly cadence, consistent declared values, 40-foot units logged in as aircraft brake housings and hydraulic assemblies, origin documentation from a certified teardown facility in Central America. She worked through the package inside an hour.
On paper, the account was clean.
31 prior shipments, all cleared on standard processing. 0 secondary flags in 14 months before October 28. She understood what that meant.
Yeah.
If the method had been operational for 14 months at monthly frequency, this was not a test shipment or a proof of concept run. It was a mature operational distribution pipeline. The October container was not the first. It was, with high probability, not close to the largest. She placed the container in controlled status, not seized, which would generate paperwork visible to anyone monitoring Meridian's import account. Not returned, which would alert the logistics coordinator that something had changed. Held in a status that read on Meridian's customs portal as routine processing delay. And she opened a coordinated investigation. I spent time going through the manifest records that came out of this case, and one number kept coming back. The declared weight variance between Meridian containers was almost too consistent across 31 shipments. Real teardown freight varies. Different aircraft types, different component ages, different quantities of hydraulic assemblies mixed in with brake cores. Legitimate bulk industrial imports show weight variance. Meridian's containers landed within a 2% weight band across all 31 shipments over 14 months. That kind of consistency in supposedly varied scrap-grade industrial cargo does not happen by accident. It happens when every container is packed to a specification and every housing is manufactured to a consistent weight. The investigation pulled all 31 prior manifests in detail, cross-referencing those manifests against ATF trace data for ghost gun frames recovered in Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas over the same 14-month window produced a regional volume correlation that the investigation team assessed as statistically significant. Not a complete chain. Not all recovered frames get traced, and not all traced frames link backward to a single source with any certainty. But the spike in untraceable compact frame semi-automatic handguns in southeastern U.S. markets beginning in late 2024 tracked against the Meridian import cadence in a way that told investigators they were looking at the right pipeline. What the investigation needed was not more historical analysis, it needed to see the network in operation. HSI filed for controlled delivery authorization on November 1, 2025. The request required sign-off from the U.S. Attorney's Southern District of Florida and coordination with CBP and ATF to ensure no parallel enforcement action would compromise the operation. Controlled delivery authorizations for weapons-related cargo require an expedited review process. The authorization came through on November 4. The October container was released to its declared destination, a teardown yard in the Doral area of Miami-Dade County. The facility was listed under a company name with no direct corporate connection to Meridian Aerospace Reclamation. The connection was operational, not registered. 3 concealed tracking devices were placed inside brake housings before release. A surveillance team established exterior coverage of the Doral facility before the container arrived. The container delivered at 2:17 p.m. on November 5. The tracking signals placed inside the 3 targeted housings all moved within 4 hours of delivery, not off-site within the building. Movement consistent with the housings being taken from the container, placed on a work surface, opened. Then at 8:47 p.m., a cargo van arrived at the Doral facility. No company markings. Florida plates registered to a shell company with an address in Hialeah. The van was at the facility for 51 minutes. It departed and did not return that night. The surveillance team tracked the van to a light industrial address in Hialeah. The tracking devices inside 3 brake housings did not move with the van. What the van carried was different, the extracted contents. The brass frames out of the aluminum housings, going to the next stage of the process. The Hialeah address was a machine shop registered under a different holding company with no surface-level connection to either Meridian or the Doral yard. The registered business. Precision Parts Fabrication, General Industrial. The facility had been at that address for 3 years under that registration. No prior law enforcement contact. HSI and ATF secured a surveillance warrant for the Hialeah shop within 48 hours. Exterior cameras went up on 3 approaches covering all visible entry and exit points. The shop ran irregular hours, which is itself a pattern, investigators noted. Legitimate precision fabrication shops operate on client-driven schedules. They do not run dark for days and then show overnight activity in windows that match cargo delivery timing from a connected facility. Over the following 6 weeks, the surveillance documented the cargo van running the Doral to Hialeah route 4 more times, each run following a Meridian container arrival. On 2 of those runs, a second vehicle, a cargo SUV with different plates, was observed departing the Hialeah shop in the days following the van's delivery. The SUV was tracked to a rented industrial bay in Fort Lauderdale. That bay was the staging location. Finished weapons, ready for distribution. A 5th target emerged from phone traffic analysis obtained under separate warrant. The U.S. logistics coordinator for the operation, operating from a residence in Miami Lakes. This individual's role was not physical handling of the product. The role was scheduling, coordinating container arrival windows with the Meridian import account, managing vehicle movement timing between the 4 sites, maintaining communication with the supply side overseas through encrypted messaging applications. The investigation team identified this person as a logistics manager, not a principal. Someone organized the supply chain, someone financed the foundry operation and the Meridian corporate structure, that someone was overseas. By mid-January 2026, the case against the US-based network was solid. But the prosecution team and HSI agreed to run the surveillance longer for one reason: the Fort Lauderdale Bay. Intelligence from surveillance activity suggested the bay was accumulating finished product. Moving before that product staged for distribution meant missing the maximum volume of seizable weapons. Moving at the right moment meant capturing 300 to 400 completed handguns before they dispersed into a regional distribution network that would be significantly harder to trace. Here's the part that doesn't sit right. Even now, the operation ran for over a year through Miami International's cargo terminal, and it worked. The method was engineered well enough to exploit a real limitation in X-ray density analysis for industrial aluminum cargo. It required 1 CBP officer on a random secondary to catch a variation that the automated system had not been designed to flag. That is not a detection system. That is luck, dressed up as process. The decision to move came in early July 2026, when surveillance indicators suggested the Fort Lauderdale inventory had stabilized near its peak. Intel pointed to a distribution movement being planned within the following 2 to 3 weeks. Moving before that movement happened meant maximum product seizure. Waiting risked the weapons dispersing. The raid date was set for July 25, 2026. Multi-site federal raid sequencing requires a level of coordination that does not look dramatic from the outside. 4 locations, 4 entry teams from 3 agencies. A 90-second entry window in which any one team moving early, or any one location being tipped through a phone call, a text message, or a vehicle on the wrong approach road at the wrong time could compromise everything. The operations plan went through 7 revision cycles across 2 weeks. Entry teams rehearsed approach and breach sequences at a staging facility the week before. Communications protocols were tested. Vehicle assignments were confirmed. One complication emerged 48 hours before the scheduled raid date. Surveillance at the Hialeah shop showed unusual overnight activity on July 19. 3 vehicles arrived between 11 p.m. and midnight. 2 of them were not in the known vehicle set for the operation. The activity lasted approximately 2 hours before the facility went dark again. The operations team assessed two possibilities. Either the shop was running a production batch outside its usual pattern consistent with normal operational variance, or the operation had been tipped and was accelerating activity before a possible enforcement action. Both scenarios required a decision. If the network was tipped, waiting meant losing the window. Moving early meant losing synchronization across 4 sites. Neither option was clean.
The decision came down to one variable. Did the Fort Lauderdale inventory move during that window? Surveillance confirmed it did not.
The cargo SUV tracked from Hialeah to the Fort Lauderdale Bay did not leave its parking position. No new vehicles entered the bay that night. The July 19 Hialeah activity was assessed as production side, not evacuation. The raid date held. The entry teams staged at 4:30 a.m. on July 21. 2 staging locations, one in the northwest Miami-Dade industrial corridor covering the Doral and Hialeah entries, one in Broward covering Fort Lauderdale. The Miami Lakes residential team staged separately in a neighborhood parking lot 3 blocks from the target address. All 4 staging locations were in radio silence from 5 a.m. No movement until the coordinated go signal. At 6:02 a.m. on July 20, 2026, all 4 teams went simultaneous. Doral, 2 workers on site at entry. No weapons, no resistance. Both detained on the exterior walkway within 30 seconds of breach. Inside the yard, the most recently arrived Meridian container had been partially processed. 41 intact brake housings remained unopened. A hydraulic press and cutting tools showed recent use on a second set of housings already open on a work table. Lab analysis of the intact 41 would later confirm 163 frames, 44 suppressor tubes, and approximately 200 pounds of raw brass still cast into the aluminum. Hialeah 3 individuals inside at the time of entry. One attempted to exit through a rear access door and was intercepted by a perimeter agent stationed on the alley approach. No weapons displayed, no shots fired. The other 2 remained in the main work area. The shop floor showed finishing equipment, a set of production jigs specifically designed for frame completion to near final specification, and components in various stages of machining. The shop had been operational that morning. Work in progress on the bench. Miami Lakes, the logistics coordinator, did not answer the entry knock. Agents made entry under warrant. The subject was found standing in the kitchen holding his phone. He had not sent a message. He was taken into custody without incident. Fort Lauderdale, 2 individuals at the industrial bay. 340 completed handguns packaged in foam-lined transport cases, organized in stacked rows against the rear wall. Each case was labeled with a distribution destination code. ATF analysts are still working to decode those destination codes against known regional distribution networks. As of the date of the arrests, the full scope of the distribution network those codes represent is not publicly confirmed. 12 total arrests across all 4 sites. No shots fired at any location. Here is the full case inventory as confirmed in charging documents. 3,400 handgun frames recovered and accounted for across all sites, counting raw castings, in-process components, and completed weapons. 1,200 suppressor tubes in various stages of completion. 460 pounds of raw brass. 340 completed handguns ready for regional distribution. Unpopular opinion? The 14-month window this operation ran successfully before the October flag is a systems failure, not a personnel success story. One officer's judgment call on one density read is not a detection system. It is a single point of failure that happened to catch. The method was designed to clear secondary most of the time, and it did. The operational math of a pipeline running monthly for 14 months and being caught once on the last run is not an argument for the detection process. It is an argument for the method's effectiveness. What do you think? Does a cargo screening system that relies on individual judgment calls on subtle density reads constitute an actual interdiction capability? Or is it luck institutionalized? Comment below. The Meridian Aerospace Reclamation import account was suspended effective July 21. All 31 prior containers are subject to retroactive manifest review. And the number of frames that successfully completed the full pipeline before July 21, leaving the Doral yard and passing through the Hialeah shop in the Fort Lauderdale Bay and into regional distribution channels is not publicly confirmed. ATF trace analysis on ghost gun frames recovered in Florida and adjacent states over the prior 14 months is ongoing. Frame geometry and tooling signatures are specific enough to constitute a forensic linkage if the match holds. Federal prosecutors in the Southern District of Florida filed a sealed indictment on July 22, 2026, covering all 12 individuals arrested across the 4 sites. A portion of those charges were unsealed for the press statement the same day. The sealed portions remain classified pending the overseas component of the investigation. The foundry at the origin port in Central America was identified during the investigation. Requests for cooperation with the relevant government are pending through diplomatic channels. The foundry's operational status as of July 24, 2026 is not confirmed in public charging documents. No arrests have been made at that location. The overseas supply contact who coordinated the foundry side production and managed the Meridian import account scheduling from outside the United States is named in the sealed indictment. That individual is not in U.S. custody. Extradition proceedings, if initiated, are not in public record as of the date of this account. One detail from the case file that stayed with me, the CBP officer who made the initial flag worked a double shift that week to cover a staffing gap in Terminal D's secondary inspection rotation. His regular shift ended at midnight. He picked up the second shift at 11 p.m. The flag container arrived at 3:47 a.m. He was 6 hours into a 12-hour shift. Standard fatigue range for secondary inspection work. He ran the scan, he saw the read, he held the container. The network is dismantled. The method is documented in federal court records. The demand for untraceable handguns in southeastern U.S. distribution markets that this pipeline existed to serve did not stop on July 21. The overseas supply contact is not in custody. The foundry's status is unconfirmed. The distribution codes on the Fort Lauderdale cases are still being analyzed. Subscribe so you don't miss the next development in this case, because the Fort Lauderdale distribution network is not yet fully mapped. And what it connects to extends well beyond 4 sites and 12 names in Miami-Dade and Broward. 1 officer, 1 density read at 3:47 a.m., 1 held container. The rest was already inside the aluminum.